Okay, hi and welcome everyone to our first BCAC Youth Learning Series webinar. I will be your host, Alicia. Sorry, I'm just letting in some more participants. Okay. The webinar has been put together today by the BCAC Youth Engagement Committee, which I'm a proud member of. So today we'll be talking about how to prepare for a post-COVID industry. I'm very excited. We have some great speakers who will be sharing tips on how to create a great resume and how to prepare for an interview. We will also be providing some industry updates from companies that attended the Waypoint event earlier that we hosted in January. And following that, we have a high-level industry overview from the BCAC Board Chair, Heather Bell. If you guys have any questions for the speakers, please submit them into the chat and we will try and answer them at the end of each segment or later on at the end. And lastly, I would like to remind everyone to please turn off their mics and inform you that I will be recording the webinar so that we can share it later. And before we begin, I would like to share a message from our Youth Engagement Committee Chair, Kelly Jameson. So I'll just share her message that she sent us. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for the very first session of BCAC's Youth Learning Series of webinars. My name is Kelly Jameson and I've been working with an awesome team on the Youth Engagement Committee. And we have launched or are launching 3 new initiatives designed specifically to support our youth aviation community through the pandemic and through all the challenges that are arising because of it. The world obviously looks much different today than it did just 3 months ago, and so our goal here is to help you through this time of uncertainty. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. I hope that you find it valuable and inspiring, and I invite you to please stay in touch with us and let us know how we can support you. Thanks for joining us today. A warm welcome, and I'll turn it over now to your host for today's session, Alicia Sopal.
There we go. So if you guys have any questions, again, just leave them in the chat. Sorry. And so first, I'd like to welcome Real from TPD, who is an HR and talent acquisition manager who will be sharing some great resume tips with us. Welcome, Real.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you to the BCAC Youth Council for having us today. I will be sharing my screen for the presentation. I just wanted to let everybody know that this presentation deck is available for anyone. Just let Alicia know, and she has a copy of it, and we can share it at any given time. Feel that this has a lot of really good information that can support you in terms of your job search. So we're going to get started. I wanted to give a quick introduction and background for myself and our company. TPD, like what Alicia mentioned, we are a North American workforce and HR solutions company. We provide a spectrum of services to different aviation companies, to different companies all across North America. Within TPD, obviously, we have our aviation team. We call ourselves Team Fly, and together we have over 20 years of experience servicing the international aviation community. So we deliver talent all over the world, and we've worked in Asia, MENA, the Middle East, North Africa, and all over Europe, and especially here in North America. So we hire for a lot of aviation technical and non-technical talents. And it's a very exciting time for us to be able to really share what we're looking at as professionals in terms of when we're looking into resumes and help you build the right resume for your future. So for our agenda today, in the interest of time, we've kept it as short as possible. But at the end of the session, what I'm looking to be able to impart to you guys is, why is a good resume important? These are the questions we want answered. What makes a resume stand out? And sections of an effective resume. And then at the end of it, obviously, we have our questions and commentaries. So imagine this. You join you get to school, you finally finish your education, you feel you're ready to take on the world. So what's stopping you? How do we open that door? Or what's the key to opening that door? And this, I feel, is why a good resume is important. So a good resume, number one, it helps you land your dream job. We need to understand that. So having a good resume allows you as a candidate to get noticed by the professional, by the talent acquisition team. And a good resume, in essence, is your initial advertising tool for potential employers to see what you bring to the table as a potential employee and essentially the future of the company. So a good resume allows you to self-advertise, to put yourself out there to the world, creating that initial connection with your potential employer and getting noticed from hundreds of applicants. So standing out. These are the three things that you really need to remember and to absorb why a good resume is very important. So now, how do you stand out? So now we know that a resume is important. Fantastic. How do we put one together? How do we stand out? Your resume, remember, your resume is an online representation of yourself. Now, we all know in this age of social sharing, employers are constantly bombarded by applicants for every single job they advertise for. And believe me when I say this, every time we put out a job posting, there are hundreds and hundreds of applicants that's coming in. So your job as the professional, as the job seeker, is to get noticed. And I found this quote online that I feel is very, very important. Your resume says a lot about you. It determines whether you will be called in for an interview or not. So putting together and making sure that your resume stands out is very, very important. So how do we do that? Number one, have an evolving resume. A resume is never a one-size-fits-all kind of document. And this is the most common mistake that a lot of job seekers, not just the new ones, but even more professionals that's already into the field, they feel that having one resume is good enough to land you any job that you want. That's absolutely wrong. Like you, as you grow as a professional, from coming from school, whether you're a mid-level professional or a senior level professional, your resume needs to move with you. It needs to move with your experiences and the industry that you're trying to get into. Number two is have a different version of your resume for different jobs. And this is what I was alluding to a while ago when I said, for example, if you're a tech, and it's okay to have one set of resume if you're a very technically inclined person. So I'll give you an example when I say that, because that's contradicting what I said earlier. If you're say a sheet metal person or you're a structures person, you can tailor your resume into that. And nine times out of 10, you're applying for jobs that is very specific to being a structures professional. And that's okay to have one resume that tailors into that based on what your experience is. When I say you need to have a different version for a different resume, so for example, if you're trying to scoot over and you have a different experience, say for example, you're an electrical AME and you're trying to get into structures, you can't use a electrical AME resume to apply for a structures role. You need to tailor your resume based on what the role is that you're applying for. The third, and it's probably the biggest pet peeve that a lot of hiring managers have and talent acquisition professionals have, is the spacing and formatting. Since your resume is a representation of yourself, how neatly you present your resume reflects directly to your work and ability for people to notice this. And this is particularly true in any level of career you're in, whether you're an entry level, mid-level, or a seasoned professional. You have to make sure that your resume is neatly presented. The reason behind that is, think about it from a hiring manager's perspective. They're going to go, am I going to let you touch my plane when you can't even fix your own resume? So like that's the thought process behind that. You need to be able to justify that, you know, you've put in enough time and attention and detail into your resume, and that allows you to properly represent yourself with your audience. So those are the two key things. Now, we're going to hop into the sections of an effective resume, and I'm just going to glance over this in the interest of time. So first area I like to call is the header, career objective, and core competencies. So your main area is your header. Make sure you have your personal information in there, your address, and province is good enough. You don't necessarily have to put your entire address down to the street number in there. And I see this very common with a lot of job seekers. Your city and your province is more than enough to share in this. Make sure your email is in there. And your email, we have to make sure that you have an email address that is professional. The last thing you want is to put a very interesting email address into your resume that becomes a direct reflection of you as a professional. So make sure that your email address is professional. If you need to open one specifically for job postings or for applications, do so in a very professional manner. And always have your LinkedIn or any website profile URL available in there for you as well. Another quick tip in here as well is, for every page, make sure you have a header section that has your personal information, your name and your phone number. The reason being is people still print out resume nowadays in this day and age, believe it or not. And the last thing you want is your resume is stacked in piles and piles of pieces of paper, and they're lost. And the next thing you know, a hiring manager is looking at one page of resume that completely doesn't match something else. So having your information in every page definitely helps track everything together and keeps everything neatly. Career objective. When you're in an entry-level professional, always put in there 1 to 2 line objective that's relevant to the role that you're applying for. And as you grow, and this is the evolution part of the resume I was talking about earlier, is you need to make sure that from an entry level with a career objective, you're switching into mid and senior level, you're switching that career objective into something that's a little bit more 1 to 2 short paragraph, and it's a summary of the career practice you've already put together as a professional. Third area is the skills, profile, education, certifications, and seminars. All 4 areas are very, very important. Again, you want to put in here as much information as you can about the preparation you've done as a professional, as a young professional entering the industry. So your skills profile, it's essentially a bullet point enumeration of the special niche skills that you have. So if you have any software programs that's relevant to the position you're applying for, any machinery, any methodology, strategic knowledge, technical knowledge. And I'll tell you why this is very important. A lot of talent acquisition professionals, when they're looking through resumes, the fastest way for us to skim through hundreds and hundreds of resumes is to use specialized keywords when we're doing our search. Imagine yourself making a Google search for something. And this is essentially what we do day in and day out. So the more specific your resume has, the more keywords that you have, the more likely your resume will be picked up when a talent acquisition professional is doing their search. So having that skills profile area will greatly increase that that potential in your resume showing up with when we do our searches. Second bit is your education. It is very important to list your education. Now, how do we do that? My recommendation is the school, have the year when you went, if it's already completed, when you completed it, or if it's still ongoing. And make sure you detail in there what you're doing in school for, because this is something that we definitely take a look at as professionals in the field. Certifications, you work really hard to get your certifications, so you got to put them in there. You have to tell that to the world. Remember, your resume is the one time you're probably never going to get judged for talking about yourself too much. So take that opportunity and really make the most out of it. If you've done any certifications, Any licenses, if you've gotten your AMEs, make sure you put that in there. If you're a member of any association that you feel is going to be relevant for your field, make sure that that's in there and it's included. Seminars, you take your time out of your very busy day to attend seminars like this one. If you feel that this seminar definitely allows you to make that step forward into your career, make sure that that's always in your resume as well. So little areas that we feel we take a look at when we're looking for the next big talent. And the most important bit is your experience. Your experience tells the story of you as a professional life in this section. It is important to note, paint a picture doing the following, okay? So make sure that for every experience that you gain or will be gaining towards your career or you already have, your title is in there, the company and the location where you've done that experience, the time period that you've served, month and year again is sufficient. Duties and responsibilities. Don't go too crazy. Make sure that you put in there what are the most prevalent duties and responsibilities that you have and that you feel is going to be relevant to the role that you're applying for. Again, make sure that your resume evolves and moves with the role that you're applying for. And if there's any gaps in the employment, like say, for example, you've taken a year off to take care of family, or you decide to go on a world tour and travel for an entire year. A lot of people don't put that in your resume, and that poses a lot of questions with hiring professionals. So to stop all of these questions from going through, do yourself a favor and put that in there. And just to let everybody know, it's okay to take career breaks. That's fine, as long as you articulate why you've done so and you've clearly noted it in your resume, instead of it just being gaps into your resume when you're applying for a job. Volunteer work and extracurricular activities, again, is very important, and it shows the type of person you are, and it shows the type of personality that you can be as a member of the organization. So the companies appreciate employees who are actively in their community and in their industry. This is a good branding both for the company and for the individual. So this is good branding for you and a good branding for the company that you will be joining. Thus, always share your extracurricular activities, your volunteer work, in great detail. So what role did you do for that volunteer work, the organization you volunteered for, and the month and year of your of the volunteer that you've done. That could also fill in the gaps into your employment experiences. So that basically sums it up. Again, remember, you are the center. This is your resume, your headers, your career objectives. Make sure that's in there, your experiences, your apprenticeship, volunteer work, your skills profile, education, certifications, and seminars. And altogether, make sure that that paints a very good story, a very good representation of who and what you want to be seen as a professional in the industry. And that wraps up my presentation. And back to you, Alicia.
Great, thank you, Real, for sharing that. Those are awesome, and thank you for breaking down kind of each segment of the resume. That's great and very helpful. We do have a question from you for you from the audience. Mm-hmm. The question is, hi, I have a question: how to avoid getting overqualified with a bunch of certifications and degrees, etc. in a resume?
First of all, there's no such thing as being overqualified in my mind. It's about finding the right fit. So in order to avoid any kind of, I'd like to call them noise in the resume, if you will, I would tailor the resume specifically, again, to what the job entails, to what the job is looking for, and this is what helps you get noticed. In terms of your qualifications, if we're talking about certificates and educational experiences, limit them to what you feel is applicable to the job, and that's what helps tone the noise down a little bit.
Okay, perfect. We have another question here. I'm curious regarding our resume references. Is there a specialized format?
None. Typically, with references that's coming in, I wouldn't even put that as part of your resume. Usually, the best practice that I've seen is always put references are ready to be furnished upon request, because you don't really want people's contacts into your resume right away, very early on in the stage. So when a company is interested in you, that's the only time after your interview, that's the only time they will reach out and ask you for for your references. So rule of thumb is don't have your references in your resume right away, but do note at the end of the resume saying that you're ready to present a slew of references anytime it's asked for.
Okay, I'll do one last one, and then maybe we can circle back later on and do some more. The last question here is, Rael, in addition to having a solid resume, do you have any advice / thoughts on using networking to advance your chances of being hired?
Absolutely. And I always say this to anybody: network, network, network. The network essentially it allows you to, number one, be ingrained in the industry, get to know real professionals who's already in the industry. And that alone is valuable knowledge that you can bring to you into the interview table. And that alone allows you to also, number one, see what's out there in the industry for you, allows you to apply, and then when you're there, it becomes a conversational piece. So you can never lose out whenever you're networking with anyone that aligns with your industry that you're trying to get into.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so we'll try and answer everybody's questions. We got a bunch more later on, but we'll be moving on. So thank you again, Rael. I just want to introduce everybody. Next up, we have Natalie, and she is from Jazz Aviation. She is an HR recruitment coordinator. Welcome, Natalie.
Hi, thank you very much, Alicia. Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Lorden, and I'm a recruiter with Jazz Aviation, and specifically, I coordinate all of the aircraft maintenance engineer hiring for our 5 maintenance bases across the country. I'm based out of our head office in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Hi from the beautiful, rainy East Coast. First of all, Alicia, I would like to thank you for asking me to be part of this webinar today, and I hope that I'm able to provide you with some information and answer any questions that you might have regarding our hiring process at Jazz. So of course, as I know you're all aware, our industry has been heavily affected by the pandemic, and as such, all of our hiring was put on hold as of mid-March. Nobody knows at this point, of course, what the future looks like or how long it will be until we get back to pre-COVID level flying. The majority of our fleet is currently parked, and well over half of our employees are currently on off-duty status right now. However, of course, as our flying increases, we will continue to call back our employees and hopefully begin recruiting for new employees in the future. But of course, nobody at this point really knows what that looks like or when that's going to be. So, all of that having been said, I would like to speak today about our recruitment process at Jazz, and specifically what I, as a recruiter, look for in a candidate. In addition, I'd like to give you an overview of our interview process and how you can best prepare for it so you'll be ready once we get back to flying. So, of course, many of the examples that I will give you today are based on aircraft maintenance engineers, just because it's specifically what I hire for. Our maintenance hiring over the last few years has been done on an ongoing basis because our company was growing so quickly and our needs were great. So in fact, in 2019, I actually hired over 120 AMEs. We hired classes of pilots every 4 to 6 weeks, pretty much year round. In addition, of course, countless positions in our in-flight department, our flight ops department, everything from finance to administration, just to name a few. Our recruitment department was extremely busy. So of course, when our hiring does resume, all of our positions will be posted on our corporate website. So it's www.flyjazz.ca/careers. We do receive all of our applications online. Even though, as Riel had indicated, that sometimes folks still do print out paper copies, we do all of our application process through our website. Just so that you understand that that's what that looks like. So let's say you possess the qualifications that Jazz is looking for. How do you land that interview? Well, you have two tools, of course, to make your first impression, your cover letter and your resume. So your cover letter serves as a short introduction, and it tells me why you're interested in the position and how you're qualified. Certainly, once I take a look at your resume, I'll be able to ascertain your specific qualifications. And of course, as again, Riel referred to on that resume, it should outline your education, your qualifications, and most importantly would be your work experience. So when hiring for AMEs, I look for resumes that are easy to read and that give me the facts. It is an advertisement of your skills. We're looking for a page or two, no more. I want to see, you outline your accomplishments, your strengths, your skills, your abilities, and certainly if you have any qualifications in terms of licenses and certifications, that you list those down as well. If you have your AME license, make sure you put that in there. If you do have it, what airplanes you're endorsed on, maybe it's a first aid certificate, human factors training. I just look for you to put all that in there anyways. So, okay, let's say that you're graduating from school and you have no relevant AME experience. How about then? So I'm going to look for things on your resume that show me that you have an interest in the specific position that you're applying for. So let's say you're a mechanic's apprentice, for example, and in your spare time, you like to work on your car. Well, I would definitely recommend that you put that in your resume in the interest and the hobbies section, because of course it shows me that you enjoy that type of work, and clearly you must have an aptitude for mechanics. Maybe your last summer job was working at the golf course and you were tinkering around fixing golf carts. It's relevant work experience because you have kept your hand skills up to date. So, it might not be specific to working on an aircraft, but it shows me that obviously you have an aptitude for it. So don't forget to put those types of things in there. What about if you have no relevant work experience at all? Well, again, it's Riel referred to volunteering. That's where it's important that that comes in. I receive a ton of resumes from students who don't have very much relevant work experience, but they volunteer at places that they can practice and refine those skills. And so I always do look to see where people have used their time to volunteer. Okay, so a little bit of information about our interview process. At Jazz, we've always been I feel, a little bit ahead of our time, because even before the pandemic hit, we conducted the majority of our interviews online using a system called HireView. So it's similar, in fact, to this Zoom call in that it is conducted like a face-to-face interview, but it's just done online. So you just need to have a steady internet connection and a webcam. And it's just conducted just straight ahead. You're on one side, the recruiter's on the other. You're having an interview, you're just not physically in the same space. So at Jazz, we conduct behavioral style interviews. The idea behind behavioral interviewing is that the most accurate predictor of future performance is past performance in similar situations. So we evaluate a candidate's past experiences and behaviors in order to determine their potential for success. So I would ask, an open-ended question, and I'm looking for you to give me a detailed response. The purpose, of course, is to learn whether you can do the job, whether you have the skills that you've listed on your resume, in addition, of course, to any questions that I might have about your particular work ethic, say, for example. So how do you prepare for a behavioral style interview? Well, the first thing would be, of course, to look at the job posting and identify the skills and the qualifications that we are looking for. And then you need to come up with specific examples where you've demonstrated those skills in the past. So I'm not looking for you to give me a hypothetical answer. I'm looking for you to give me a specific time when that actually did happen to you in a situation. So you need to take the time to think about those questions based on your past experiences using what we call the STAR formula. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about what the formula is per se. There is a lot of information about it online if you want to just like click in behavioral style interviews, STAR. So essentially, STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. So again, a typical behavioral style interview question could be something like this. Now, of course, this answer would be specific to an AME, a question or an answer that they would give me. So if I was to pose a question like this, tell me about a time when you identified a problem or error that nobody else in your work group or crew noticed. So describe the situation. So, okay, in 2018, I was working in the hangar with ABC company, and my crew chief asked me to check on a component installation. So I noticed that the lock wire was installed incorrectly. It was backwards, and I knew that I needed to fix it. That's the task. So I removed the lock wire and reinstalled it correctly. That was the action. And the task was completed and the aircraft was returned to service. That was the result. Now, I know that when you start, when you're first doing those behavioral style interviews, you're not going to be thinking in your head, okay, did I use the S, did I use the A, did I get the result? But I think if you practice a little bit, think about some examples that you have, that it will help you to sort of be prepared when a behavioral style interview or question is asked to you. So it's just, I think the more you rehearse it in your brain, the easier it will become. In addition, of course, to the behavioral style questions, I'm also looking to see that you've done your homework on our company. So I'll probably ask you questions about our fleet, such as size and aircraft type, what our route network is, what our core values are, for example. I'm just trying to determine if you're going to be a good fit in our organization. Safety, employee safety, and customer safety are our two top priorities, so I just need to make sure that they're also going to be yours. So our interviews usually take between 45 minutes to an hour to conduct. Once the interview is completed, it's shared with the hiring manager, who will review and discuss the interview with myself or another recruiter, and together we did make the final decision whether to move that candidate forward in our recruitment process. If the candidate successfully passes the interview, then we do move on to some other assessments. We conduct a criminal background check, we do drug and medical assessments, we do reference checks. Certainly for pilots, there are other evaluations that need to be completed, such as simulator evaluations. If you're applying for a position in finance, there would be a math assessment that would have to be done. If you successfully complete all the steps in the recruitment process and there are positions available, you will be offered a position. If there are no positions available at that particular time, you are placed generally in a hiring pool and will be offered if and when positions do become available. Certainly with pilots, on your first day of ground school, you draw for your seniority and aircraft type, and then your base is pretty much determined by the aircraft type that you draw. And that pretty much sums up the recruitment process at JAS. Certainly, I guess, folks, in summary, for those of you still in school or recently graduated, new to the industry, these are unprecedented times. Nobody really can say at this point what the future looks like, but I would certainly encourage you all to continue to, seek out opportunities to practice your skills. And when we emerge from this crisis, and we will emerge from this crisis, that you would look at our Air Canada Express operation as a desirable place to work. So thank you so much, folks, for your time today.
Thank you, Natalie, for sharing those great tips for how to prepare for an interview. We have a question for you.
Okay.
How would we prepare for simulator training?
Okay, well, now again, I do mostly AME hiring. I'm not entirely sure with regards to the pilot, how you would prepare for a sim evaluation, but I would be happy to find out who asked that question, and I will consult with my colleague who does the pilot recruitment. It's a pretty complicated process from what I understand, but if you could get me the name, I could certainly get the answer for you in more detail.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so the person that asked that question, Connor, if you just want to leave your email or personally privately message me in the chat, and we can get you that answer. And I've got another question here. Are there opportunities to move up within the company, specifically Jazz?
Yes, oh, most definitely. In fact, the way our hiring works too is that we do try to, when opportunities become available within our company, that we always post those positions internally first. So we will always give preference to existing employees to be able to, go on course. Take, if it's for an AME, for example, to be able to do an endorsement course. We have a whole training department that looks, very favorably about promoting people and getting them prepared for the next level. So absolutely, Jazz, is a company, of 7,000 or 8,000 people, and so we are continuously looking to promote from within. So lots of opportunities for sure.
Perfect. We've got another question here. Does float plane work look attractive to Jazz?
Most definitely. Now, again, I know that this is a bit more of a specific pilot question. I know that there are a minimum number of flying hours that pilots must have before we can consider their resumes. It changes, certainly depending on the year. I believe that the minimum number is 750 flying hours. I could be wrong on that. Again, I'm more of the maintenance person, not so much the pilot person. I could find that out for sure. Again, if you want to leave your name, I can certainly, get the exact number of hours, but it doesn't necessarily mean the aircraft type. It's really just more about your experience and your number of hours.
Okay, we'll do one last question before we move on here. When does recruitment usually happen for AMEs? Are there certain cycles within a year or every 2 years?
Right. So as I mentioned, certainly over the last several years, our maintenance hiring is ongoing because we've been hiring at such a rapid pace. As I said, I hired 120 AMEs in 2019 alone. So the way that the recruitment works for maintenance is that, certainly we always look at the colleges that are graduating folks from the AME programs. We like to get into certainly to those schools and do some interviews in person sometimes. But I wouldn't say it's cyclical. It's really happening on an ongoing basis. And one of the things that I would say to people if they are looking at Jazz as an employer would be to keep your relocation options open. So even if you are a graduate from BCIT, say for example, but our opportunities right now are in our heavy maintenance base in Halifax, it doesn't matter where you live, but if you're willing to relocate, it certainly would increase your opportunities. Unfortunately, if you kind of box yourself in and say, well, I'm living in BC, I can only work in BC. If we don't have any opportunities in our maintenance department in Vancouver, you've kind of limited your opportunities to, to be employed. So I would always recommend that folks keep their relocation options open.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. I'd like to thank you both for providing us with those helpful tips. I hope you all feel inspired and motivated to update your resume so that they'll be ready to send out when the industry returns to normal. And also, as Riel mentioned earlier, if you guys would like to have a copy of his presentation, he's offered to share that with us. So just send me a private message with your email and I can shoot that off to you. So next, we'll move on to presenting some aviation industry updates that we received from companies that attended the Waypoint event we hosted earlier this year. We reached out to them to ask them how they were coping and affected by COVID-19. So I'll just pull up my PowerPoint here. Okay. So we'll do our first Intervistas They have been monitoring the impact that COVID-19 has had on both a local and global scale. They have developed a set of 4 recovery scenarios, each of which assumes a unique trajectory for air travel demand. Intervista's summer recovery model assumes a negative 44% decline in air travel in 2020, with demand recovering to 2019 levels by late 2021. On the other hand, the protracted recovery scenario anticipates a negative 73 drop in 2020 with a complete recovery by 2023. The continued actions of government, industry organizations, and consumers will play a key role in defining the pace of the recovery and hence the job prospects of those within the industry. That was given to us by David Kojakar, who is a senior analyst and also a member of our Youth Engagement Committee. Next up, we have an update from Air Canada. Air Canada initially participated in the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy Program, which prevented widespread job losses for several months. However, effective June 7th, approximately 50 to 60% of Air Canada's 38,000 employees will be laid off. We estimate about 20,000 people will be affected on the Air Canada pilot side. 162 pilots elected to take early retirement, and 627 pilots have been furloughed. No further imminent pilot furloughs are expected due to a 6-month agreement negotiation between Air Canada Pilots Association and Air Canada, valid until September 30th, 2020. With 225 grounded aircraft, Air Canada is losing $22 million a day and currently flying at only 5% of the capacity it flew last year. They have 4 Boeing 777s and 3 Airbus 330s that have been converted into an all-cargo configurations. Air Canada Cargo has now been operating more than 1,200 cargo-in flights since the end of March. Air Canada also an offering Class A and B sharing offerings and convertible notes to respectively raise approximately 500 million Canadian and 400 US, which will allow Air Canada to be more operationally flexible in the recovery of COVID-19.
Alicia, sorry, the mic is coming out a little bit fuzzy for everyone.
Oh, sorry, okay. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Air North. So we are foreseeing challenges to persist until we see an increase in air travel demand. Until then, we are continuously looking at ways to rationalize our service and manage our expenses. For example, pre-COVID-19, we were operating 30 flights weekly to our gateway destinations. At the beginning, we trimmed our flight schedules down to 3 flights per week. This was until the Yukon government asked us to increase our frequencies in order to provide timely options for essential travel and movement of essential goods. Today, we are operating 5 flights per week to our gateway airports. Thank you, Jackie Yim, who is the finance manager, who provided us with that update. We'll move on to BCIT Aerospace Campus. In order to protect our community during the COVID-19 pandemic, students, faculty, and staff, all ongoing and new courses and programs will be delivered in a primarily online format throughout the summer semester. The BCIT ATC has been working on supplement our online classes with lab and shop sessions for the phase 2. Our fall 2020 courses will be delivered partially online. This is obviously not the preferred method, as hands-on programs are not experiencing the same quality of career-oriented education, but student safety is always the utmost importance to us. Our courses require the use of specific equipment, tools, or facilities, and that is difficult to be replaced or replicated in an online environment. The situation will evolve over the summer, and BCIT ATC will continue to adapt as needed to ensure the safety of our students, faculty, and staff. We know there will be challenges. However, our faculty and support members have been focused on finding innovative ways to ensure an enriching BCIT experience. Thank you, Sanja Boskovic, who is the Associate Dean at the BCIT Aerospace Campus. Oops, sorry. Next, we have an update from Chinook Helicopters. It has been an interesting 2 months. We are now operational again, and we have been careful with everyone's health as it is our primary concern. I would estimate to date we have had a 50% decrease in business after returning to work. However, it is in its early days as it's only been a week and a half since we've been operational. I'm forecasting a 20 to 30% decrease in sales in the next year. We have a robust procedure in place and are adapting it as we see things that can be improved. I also have been doing interviews with industry pilots and company owners to get opinions from a wide range of people. And the platform is called CAV OK Aviation, and I call them Fireside Chats. Thank you, Kathy Press, who is the CEO. And Jazz, we have an update from Jazz as well. So we're continuing to focus on the health and safety of employees and passengers and access the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy Program for Jazz employees, mitigating significant employee reductions and supporting business resumption plans. Planning to commence an operation of a Dash 8-400 simplified package freighter under the Air Canada Express banner, allowing Chorus to transport loose cargo like medical supplies, PPE, and other goods needed to support the ongoing fight against COVID-19. The modifications can be applied to one of 13 select aircraft in our Dash 8-400 fleet. These 13 aircrafts are positioned across the country, providing reasonable flexibility to potential customers. Published Chorus's first corporate sustainability report describing Chorus's commitment to safety, our people, communities, and environment. And in 2019, we operated approximately 700 daily flights to over 85 destinations in North America under the Air Canada Express brand. Chorus is working with its main customer and partner, Air Canada, which has implemented a second quarter network-wide capacity reduction of approximately 85 to 90%. As a result, Chorus Air Canada Express flying has been reduced to approximately 90% for April and May, resulting in significant temporary employee reductions. An update from TBD. Effects we have seen in the market are workforce contractions, both temp and permanent layoffs in various industries we work with, a sudden shift in our clients allowing employees to work from home, companies accessing what they are true essentials in their businesses, and businesses operating in the essential category needing additional manpower to catch up to the demand, increase in the need for more healthcare related workers. And during the last few months, we have embarked on the following moves: adjusting to meet the needs of our partners and delivering the much needed HR support and business adjustment and contractions, maximizing the support the government is providing to all businesses across the board, allowing technology and initiatives to ensure business continuity, whether it be from communication, social distancing, wristbands, or any area of our clients that need support. All in all, being agile allowed us to maintain our workforce and support our clients' needs. And that update was provided from Real. Sorry. Next up, we have an update from Transport Canada. So Transport Canada has developed an aviation recovery work framework that targets measures into 4 broad categories. I'll just briefly talk about them. So we'll just do economic. So they have some economic relief in the form of government support and payments, TC service fees waived, airport authorities ground lease rent waived, ongoing measures under consideration. The second category being public health. So they have medical questionnaire screening, PPE requirements, physical distancing, cleaning and disinfecting, testing, and contract tracking. The third category is regulatory, so review and rollback of exemptions, temporary and permanent leniency measures, review and acceleration of irritant removal, applies to both regulatory requirements and standards, and delay into coming delay coming into force. The fourth category is non-regulatory. So policy changes, oversight activities, facilitation, service delivery, international agreements, digitalization, and service delivery transformation. Here are some notable exemptions. Some are forthcoming that are relevant to the youth and young professional community. Validity period for aviation medical certs, flight crew permits, licenses, and ratings, FTUs, flight simulator training programs, and level 7 flight training devices for helicopter air operators, and also extending limitations to address incomplete flight test candidates. And our last update is from WestJet. These are strange times, and despite the reality of managing airline operations at levels not seen since 2003, we are busier than ever. This is what I would advise aspiring aviators. Pandemic aside, the world wants to travel. In the last 24 years alone, the number of Canadians traveling by air has doubled from 45 million to 90 million. If you want a future-focused role with an irreplaceable skill base, pilot is as good as it gets. The world wants to travel safely. The safest year on record for aviation was 2017, and the second was 2018. All three safest years in this decade. Flying is 8 times safer for a guest than traveling in private cars, and pilots are universally recognized as leaders in operational safety, best practice, and risk assessment. The world loves Canadian pilots. The commercial industry has inherited the great reputation of the Canadian Air Force for flexibility, resilience, and responsiveness. Flying across 5 different time zones, every form of terrain and weather, in the second largest country on Earth is an asset the rest of the world looks for. Aviation is one of the greatest industries for accountability, learning, and development. And I've spent 3 decades across 3 continents in multiple different roles, from commercial to air traffic control, and I'm proud to have taken the most roles by flying a plane or fixing a plane. If you want career development and diversity, aviation is perfect. And lastly, none of your mates will ever have a better view from their office window, guaranteed. Thank you, Ed Sims, who is the President and Chief and CEO of WestJet. Oops. Okay, so next we will move on to our next speaker, who is the current board chair of BCAC, and she has been heavily involved in helping advocate for our BC aviation industry during these uncertain times. So please welcome Heather Bell.
Thanks, Alicia, and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today. This is a great event, and well done to the Youth Engagement Committee for putting this together. So as Alicia said, I am the board chair of the British Columbia Aviation Council, and I always like to remind everyone about the vision of the British Columbia Aviation Council, which is an aviation and aerospace industry that is visible, connected, and thriving. During this pandemic, it's a little hard to imagine that our industry is thriving. We know that everyone's going through some hard times, but in our efforts to remain visible and connected, the Aviation Council put together a COVID-19 strategic response team made up of myself, our vice chair, Tara Fraser, who is also the CEO of Esqueo Air, board member David Nauzik, board member Kathy Press, who is also the CEO of Chinook Helicopters, and our executive director, Dave Frank. We decided we need a strategic team because we wanted to stay involved with everything that was going on, and things were changing rapidly as the province started to lock down and our borders started to close. We were invited on to many calls and conferences, so we put the team together so that we could break up this workload and make sure that we were out there representing BCAC and all the aviation industry's interests in our province. So we have been connecting and collaborating with the provincial government, federal government, all the industry associations, and our community at large. We've been holding weekly, if not bi-weekly calls with different sectors of our community. we broke up our community into 3 different sectors, those being air operators, airports, and flight training units, because we felt that they each had different issues and we're going to need a bit of a different response. So some of the calls that we're involved in, we are on the BC Chamber of Commerce-led COVID-19 Cabinet. We are sitting in with Transport Canada and are on the Security and Operations Committee, as well as TC's Northern and Remote Communities Committee. There's a call, I think it's gone out weekly, with Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. Some of these calls were happening daily. Most of them have gone down to weekly or sometimes even every other week now, as things are starting to settle down a bit with government response and slow reopenings. We have corresponded with the Office of the Prime Minister, Transport Canada, the Minister of Transportation, Mark Garneau, as well as with Premier Horgan and Minister Trevina's office. We are in close contact with all these levels of government, and they are seeking our advice and asking us about how our community is doing. So what are we hearing from all these different sectors? Well, as you can imagine, as it started, we heard the word dire a lot. Being on these calls daily, and Dave Frank is with us today and he can probably attest, it was really hard to hear about the struggles of our members and what everyone was going through. But it's now turned to a bit more of a hopeful scenario. So what we heard from the flight training units, because they were not deemed as essential service under the civil aviation header, they went ahead with extreme caution. Most of the flight training units closed. They didn't have to. It was not deemed that they had to close, but as you can imagine, and I think more of you on this call are more aware than I, what happens for pilot training in particular is it's very close contact. So caution was the watchword. So for the most part, those operations closed down. They are slowly reopening with all the requirements and recommendations from WorkSafe BC. But as you can imagine, revenues have been severely impacted for our FTUs. The airports fell under the category of essential service, but on average, when I talk about airports now, I'm talking about the smaller airports, not our NAS, not the national airport system, not YVR, not the bigger airports, but some of our smaller airports. On average, we are seeing passenger levels, flights, and revenues down over 90%, probably about 96%, with several airports having 0 revenue for the last month or two. They were experiencing a lot of confusion as the subsidy programs were coming in from the federal government, because a lot of them are not eligible or couldn't determine if they were eligible, because there are so many different levels of airports out there, and their funding models and how they operate is all different. You have your federally funded airports, you have some that are owned by Transport Canada, some that are owned by cities and municipalities. So there was a lot of confusion out there, and they were having difficulty in figuring out how they were going to keep their doors open without any kind of revenue. For the most part, the airports have put all their capital projects on hold, with the exception of those few transport-owned airports who seem to be moving ahead slowly. We have to remember that for a lot of these airports, their operational overhead remained the same because they were required to keep their infrastructure up to safety standards. So been some very tough times for some of our smaller airports. For our air operators, we're seeing the revenue situation very similar. Some air operators, and now again, I'm referring to ones that we didn't hear from in Alicia's update, so I'm not necessarily referring to Air Canada, WestJet, Jazz, but our other operators. Some continue to operate. If you live near Richmond, you would have still seen Helijet flying overhead, and Harbour Air was flying. But some closed down completely. Pacific Coastal closed down completely. They just opened up again on June 1st. So again, tough times because they're an essential service. So they were trying to keep some of their routes open, knowing that this was a requirement to keep access to some of these remote and northern communities. But it's been very, very tough. There's certainly other areas of our community or our industry that we haven't been in close contact with. AMEs, the maintenance sector comes to mind, the aerospace sector comes to mind, and certainly all of these have all been impacted as well. So we've been holding these calls to bring the community together. They've been very well attended, and it allows them to exchange information on how they are staying open or reopening or what their fears are. So what are the requirements? There was some confusion around how they reopen. We know we're regulated for safety at all levels by Transport Canada, but then it became the workplace environment as regulated by WorkSafe BC. Do we have to have WorkSafe reopening plans? Are they going to be audited? There were all these questions that were coming to mind for businesses as they tried to spool up again. And then to the fear of responsibility. We don't know what's happening. What if we open and there's an outbreak in our organization? Like, what's our level of responsibility? So these are all things that we just were trying to get a platform for people to discuss. And then certainly we would go out and try and get answers as best we could for these questions. So what's going to happen, as you heard Ed Sim say, someone who I highly respect, the desire to travel will remain high. And I think we all feel that in ourselves. So what we're watching cautiously is the consumer confidence, which we know is not as high right now, and will be impacted by what happens in the next few months. So we're all hearing it. Will there be a second wave? What's happening in the economy? We watch our index indicators, the Dow. It doesn't seem to be as bad as it could be, certainly, but what's the next thing that's going to happen? What's going on in the States right now with the rioting that's happening down there? All these things impact greatly the economy. Then, of course, the vaccine. That's the big hope. On the news this morning and last night, Dr. Fauci was reporting that there could be a vaccine on the near horizon. It seems to be a bit sooner than what we thought, but these are the things that we will have to watch to see how that consumer confidence changes. And then, of course, we're looking at the global environment. It's not just what we do here, or what we do between here and the United States. It's globally as travel and the industry is. I always wonder and think about being, super cup half full person. What is the silver lining in this, if we can find one? Certainly we have seen with Transport Canada, our regulator, we've never seen them react with the speed and flexibility that they have than during this pandemic. We say on almost every call, kudos Transport Canada, our hat is off to you, because they really were listening to what our industry was saying, and the exemptions that were coming out or the extensions to time-sensitive regulatory requirements is nothing we've ever seen before. So in my mind, I'm keeping back there, we know you can do it. We know you can act this way. So let's hope that something like this sticks. Also, I'm involved in a lot of different things that are being affected by the pandemic, and I keep saying, let's not let a great pandemic pass us by. We have to figure out how to come out of this and do things differently. There's a lot of things in our industry that can be different and better. So innovation is going to be more important than ever, and I'm going to say it is the young people, the youth, those that are just entering into the industry that are going to come up with some really great ideas and great ways to improve our industry. And when we talk about innovation, I just went on to the IATA website because Alicia asked me to do a few of the higher level, global impacts. So not expecting anyone to read that. It's very tiny. Just know that IATA, the International Air Transportation Association, has published a layered approach for industry restart. So they have all these recommendations that are focused on the different levels of travel. So pre-flight, in-flight, post-flight. And it's interesting. And there's things in there that you highly would expect to see. But there's a few things that I thought, okay, there's some things in here that sparked my interest, like self-service options for check-in. We know that they're out there, but they're not everywhere. Well, maybe this will push that to move a little bit faster. Boarding should be made as efficient as possible. No kidding. Like, wouldn't that be great if there was actually some efficient standards in boarding that became universal? Reduce congregation of passengers in the cabin, no more are you in the seat where everyone's lined up in front of you to go to the bathroom. Enhanced and more frequent deep cleaning of the cabin. Now, this is an interesting one because we've all become more aware of our environment. I flew home from Phoenix during the pandemic, but just in the very beginning of it, obviously, when things were still moving. And I got on the airplane and I was traveling with a friend, and we both got out our wipes and we were wiping down the aircraft. And we were in a fairly new aircraft with fairly new leather seats. And the flight attendant came to us and said, you don't worry, because we clean these seats at least once a month, which just made us go, oh my God. But, these are just the kind of things that we're going to be thinking about in the future. Now, I know in the aviation industry, the margins are so tight, it's unbelievable. So the idea is you got to keep that airplane moving. There is no time to do a deep clean on that aircraft. So, okay, what's the new innovative way that we can turn that aircraft around, but still, be cognizant of some of these things? Automated procedures for customs and border, accelerated processing of baggage. These are all things that are going to need to have, somebody's going to come up with some really great ideas, and people are going to be willing to take a chance and do something different. So all that to say, I think there's some great possibilities going forward. IATA did also say that these measures should be temporary and regularly reviewed, which is great, and replaced when more efficient options come in or they're no longer required. So that's more about the things like the wearing of masks and, maybe having seats open in between passengers, etc. But there are two areas that the industry is looking at that they're hoping will change the game in this pandemic, and that's COVID-19 testing, as well as the contact tracing capabilities. And then these immunity passports, which causes some people a lot of angst, just because, it's a bit of a personal invasion of privacy for some. But, they back it by saying when these things are backed by medical science and recognized by governments. So they're thinking of ways to get things going. From another high-level look, Nav Canada, the air navigation service provider, what has their response been? This would be nationally. So I just want to remind people that Nav Canada is not a government agency. It is a not-for-profit private agency. They did introduce a temporary level of service reduction from 121 days from when it was implemented. This level of service reduction was approved by Transport Canada without the usual vigorous documentation, which is a hazard identification risk assessment. It's usually Nav Canada has to spend months and months and months doing this, submitting it to Transport Canada, back and forth. This happened very quickly. Nav Canada did do an assessment on the facilities to, in their words, ensure that, there was still communication capability, there was location preference, because the sites that were being reduced in hours were near other sites that could offer the same facilities. And the reduction was in an overnight service of reduction. So when we say overnight, we mean the midnight hours. So not, late in the evening, but actually overnight. And the sites weren't closed. The sites just did not have flight service attendants or tower attendants. Now, full disclosure, I retired from Nav Canada. I spent 35 years in air navigation. When I retired, I was a general manager for this province, the Vancouver Flight Information Region. So I tried to calm people in the beginning by saying, let's remember, it's overnight, it's midnight, probably not a lot of things happening at these sites anyway. But when they came out with the list of sites to be reduced, there was 18 sites across Canada, but 11 of them were in BC. So that caused our members a bit of eye-opening and angst. But so we went out and got Nav Canada to come on our calls to try to allay some of the fears. So the reasoning that there was more sites in British Columbia is just because there's more sites in British Columbia. By virtue of our terrain and geography, we have a lot of small airports that are close to each other within the same communication band. within the same coverage and radar, those kind of things. So from a safety perspective, they felt that, you know, it was okay to reduce the hours in these sites. So NAV Canada was saying they were doing this as a means to ensure that they didn't have to fully close a site. They were afraid that in some of the smaller sites where there's only, you know, they may only have 10 or 12 employees. So the employees cycle through the entire workforce in their shift work, that if someone was to come be positive for COVID, it has the potential to shut down the entire site. So they wanted to be able to have enough people that they could realistically have someone go off or be quarantined and still have people available for the core daylight hours. They told us that they did a high level of consultation and collaboration with operators and airports. We're not sure, that's not what we heard afterwards from some of our members, but there's always that thing about consultation, depending on what side you're on it. You know, is it enough consultation? So they did, however, put the onus on the airports to provide overnight lighting. So if an airport did not have a remote pilot controlled lighting system, an RCAL, some chose to put one in at their expense. And others were just requested to leave the lights on overnight at strength 3, which of course is a cost to that airport. So it wasn't without its pain point, certainly. Well, it was with a lot of pain points, but NAV Canada felt it was something they needed to do. They did say they would reinstate the service on request if there was an emergency. We asked them about what if there's a forest fire, you know, if this goes into fire season, what if there was an emergency. They said they would have people back at the sites right away. Now, unfortunately, Kamloops was one of the sites where the overnight service was has been temporarily reduced. And we know that right after this level of service, there was the very unfortunate military accident in Kamloops. Did not happen at night, but the site requested that services being reinstated overnight in case there was some emergency work that needed to be done. And that didn't seem to be followed through on. So I'm putting that out there anecdotally, just as of being totally transparent. It's what we heard. We didn't follow up on it because the site, you know, it was kind of like happened and is in the past now. So some of the things I'd like to bring up in my 35, well, it's not 35 years now, it's pushing closer to 40 years in this business. I've seen a lot of things that have been interruptive to our industry. When I became an air traffic controller in 1983, it was the same year that Ronald Reagan fired all the air traffic controllers in the United States. So that was a bit of an eye-opener and caused some disruption, certainly to the national airspace system in the States. But that turned around pretty quickly. I was working during SARS-1 and didn't have as big an impact on the British Columbia aviation economy, but it did have a big impact in Canada. It had a pretty big hit in Toronto because there was some SARS cases there. I was working during the Icelandic volcano eruption, and I used to be able to say the name of that volcano because I was working in traffic management, so we dealt with it every day. And that was actually a huge impact to the Canadian aviation industry because the volcanic ash was hanging over the Atlantic Ocean. So traffic between Canada, North America, and Europe was highly impacted for 8 days. The airlines lost in excess of $1.7 billion. Airports over $1 billion. NAV Canada was highly affected financially because their main revenue generator is that Atlantic route in between Newfoundland and Europe. But we came back from that. And 9/11, similar thing. I was also working during 9/11, and as a radar controller in 9/11, to sit for days on end with not a single airplane, with the exception of Air Force One and its accompanying fighter jets, to be flying over North America was a very, very eerie thing to see. We just sat there watching blank radar screens day after day. People are saying that, you know, this pandemic is like SARS and 9/11 all rolled into one, and financially it's got a big impact. There is some similarities between this and 9/11. 9/11 was a bit of a fear factor. You know, people were afraid to get on an airplane, but that didn't last that long before we got our confidence back that, the safety measures are being put in place. And I think that's what we're going to see with this pandemic as well. So I think this too shall pass. Prior to the pandemic, the industry was so strong. You heard Natalie say she hired, I don't know if I wrote down the number, 120 maintenance engineers. The British Columbia Aviation Council spent many an hour going out and talking to people saying this industry is in a human resources crisis. We do not have enough people. If I met someone who said they were considering a career in aviation, particularly a pilot, I said, cannot be a better time. Get in, you're going to write your own ticket, off you go. So it doesn't seem like it's that way right now, but if you listen to, the people that are in the industry that have seen it before, it's going to come back. There's a lot of opportunity, and I wouldn't give up. It's a very resilient industry, and it is ubiquitous. I can think of my mother who didn't get on an airplane until she was in her very late 30s. My children are on airplanes when they're babe in arms. They've been flying on their own forever. I mean, I don't think it's very hard to know someone now who has not traveled. Not everyone across the globe has that privilege, but there's such a high percentage of people, and it's going to come back. Maybe a bit different, but it will come back. So I think the future is still bright. We have some work to do, and it's gatherings like this that are going to allow us to think about how we get through this. But I think we're going to be okay. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Alicia, and thank you everyone for joining us today.